right, I'm speaking with Margaret Schedel. I've been following her work via Facebook and also through mutual connections. You worked with some with Pauline Oliveros, right? Am I mistaken?
Yeah, I have a deep listening certificate.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Many suites and yeah.
Were you involved in the deep listening convergence like a few years back?
I went to a deep listening conference 2 years ago.
Oh, okay. So there was a big event where there were 50 people. I was like the technical
nice.
Director for this thing where we played in 3 different places along the Hudson River, and it was probably before your involvement. Pauline and I also go way back, so I think that's where she was the one who mentioned that you were into investigating sonification, and so that's why that's why I added you on Facebook, and then
cool.
And then I started seeing you referring to different things. So what's your work in that area involved?
So I have a couple different projects. The one that I guess has gotten the most attention is the sonification of nanomaterials. So my husband is a scientist who works at Brookhaven National Lab, and he shoots X-rays at nanoparticles. And I was trying to understand exactly how his setup worked, and he said, oh, well, basically it's the fast Fourier transform of the real space density. I was like, oh, okay, cool. He's like, wait, what?
Yeah, I think I read that article on your blog.
Why do you think that? Why does that make sense to you? And I was like, well, because we use FFT all the time in computer music. And then I said, well, if your stuff is just, if you're using an FFT to generate your visuals, then we could use it very easily to generate sound.
Right. Yeah. Ready-made. So that's pretty. I saw that you have an ongoing blog that discusses your various projects, and that's where I saw that particular project being talked about. So what was is there a place where we could access the result of that research, or?
Yeah, we've published it for the proceedings of the International Conference on Auditory Display.
Sure, ICAD, yeah.
Yeah, ICAD. So I don't know whether that's open to the public, but if there's people with access through their universities, you can see it that way, and I should find out whether I can just put it up on my own website.
I think you can. I mean, I've published a bunch of stuff on ICAD over the years, and they've never stopped me from putting access. Yeah, better to check probably. So let me see. Let me just see. I'm Googling right now to get the. I'll add this to the notes that accompany the podcast. So let's dig down a little bit. So you had the fast Fourier transforms from your husband's nanotechnology work, and how did you realize them? In Max or C Sound, or how did that go?
It's actually Python.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
So it's just faster to do it that way because the amount of data that we had, and then we could script it. And so basically just figuring out how to map the data into sound took the most time because the programming was fairly trivial because all we were doing was additive synthesis.
Right. And so which Python library did you end up using? Because there are a few of them.
Oh, whichever one recommended that was good for audio. Or maybe it was Roger Dannenberg recommended it.
Oh, yeah. Sure. I've worked with Roger on a bunch of things. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I tend to go towards the techie nitty-gritty on these things just because it's kind of frustrating. I don't know do you know David Worrell, who's this Australian guy was trying to develop a standardized. David Worrell, that's.
Yeah, I co-edited an issue of organized sound on sonification with him.
Oh, okay. Well, how did I miss that? David crashed at my house back in the 80s one time when he was traveling through the Bay Area when I was living there. Well, I still live there. Well, it's a long story. Anyway, I'm here in Texas for my teaching thing. So anyway, enough about me. I found the hearing nanostructures study in timbral sonification.
Yeah.
So I'm like I mentioned when I missed our first appointment earlier today, that I was writing this article, and I'm kind of dealing with this idea of we're mapping time onto these things. Because the visual, you can look at the beginning and the end. There's no like temporal thing. But sonification has this weird thing where it has to be exposed in time. How did you deal with that issue with this particular thing?
So the interesting thing, and we talk about it in that article, is that most of the work in sonification is using data sets that occur over time. So we had to add a time-based component to this data. And so what we ended up doing is sort of sweeping through the data like a clock hand. If you imagine the picture, it's radial data anyway. So if you can think of 0, 0 sort of vertex at the bottom corner, and then sweeping over the data with a clock hand so that the line has the low frequencies on one end and the high frequencies at the other, and the brightness determines the loudness.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of that radial. I don't know if you, John Eisenberg wrote this thing for Cycling 74. It was kind of a beat-oriented sweep hand deal.
That for CMJ back in the day.
Yeah, right. And there was even another one. There was an interval project that Dan O'Sullivan, who's now running ITP at NYU, did at interval as a research thing. It was that sweep arm thing. It's a really effective way. So would you do this one FFT at a time, or would you lay in a new one after it had done a full sweep, or how did that work?
Each data set we would do this for. So we've done about 5,000 of them now.
Yikes.
We're trying to figure out, they're in the middle of doing these really cool projects with laser annealing, which actually change the temperature of the sample over time while it's being shot at with X-rays. So that one would actually have that time-based component. And so we're trying to figure out how, now that we have the time based on position, what would we do for time?
Right. So maybe make an animation out of it or something and sweep in it. That's problematic, isn't it? I mean, one thing. I'm working with Tim Perkis on this Connectome project here at the Art Science Lab, and Andrew Blanton. And one thing that we're thinking about is this idea of doing things ecologically. So an object like that has you just play it all at once, and as it changes in time, you hear the change kind of environmentally. But anyway, that's just part of the deal of what we're talking about. Are there any other projects in sort of the sonification area that you've been focusing on?
So there's a couple other ones more on the health records side of things. So I'm working with the biomedical informatics group at Stony Brook to use sonification as sort of another data channel for doctors, especially looking at slides of cancers. So hoping that the sort of noise reduction that our ears are so good at would be good for these types of data sets. Another thing we're trying to do is sonify a whole bunch of data for these IRB trials to give a sonification library out for multiple people that doesn't need IRB protocols. So it's totally anonymized but useful. And another thing that we're working on is the sonification of gait of Parkinson's patients. So it started by using a Kinect and sort of sonifying joints, and we're trying to get it to be just a little sensor in a shoe, and then have the sonification be played over your smartphone.
Okay, that's cool.